So I try and tell people, look, who's one of the great saints that we hold up in our culture? Mahatma Gandhi, right? I certainly venerate him. He's an amazing person. And I read very deeply about Gandhi, and I wrote about him in my third book, The Strategies of War. And his goal was to throw the English out of India so they could finally experience independence, because the people had been subjugated for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be human in a way, right? A very noble goal. But he realized quickly on how difficult it would be. So he had to be strategic. And so he had things like the Salt March, where he very much plotted in advance that he knew, using his method of civil disobedience, where once the police came out, you were not to fight, you were to accept them. If they beat you, you accepted it. You never fought, no violence. But he knew that that back in the day before television, that the media, the newspapers, would cover their English bobbies or whomever they were beating these people up. And it would play horribly in England because people in England thought that they were very liberal and open-minded, that they weren't these horrifying imperialists. He was strategic. He knew that he had to get maximum publicity for very ugly confrontations. Years later, Martin Luther King, another icon who also practiced civil disobedience, utilized the same tactics in his campaigns in Selma and Montgomery. At one point, it was very controversial. He had children of the ages 13, 14 involved in this march, and that they would get beaten up. People were in his group castigated for this. How could you be like that? He knew that that would play on television now to the white audiences around America. They'd be horrified. If you want power in this world, if you are fighting for a cause, if you want some kind of justice, you have to be strategic. You have to think like that. You have to think in terms of power. People just don't give themselves up. You know, if we have the Me Too movement now, men are not just going to give up all of their control in a place like Hollywood. You have to hit them. You have to be strong. You have to be forceful. It's a power game. And I can't stand people who are naive, who think that just being themselves, just being virtuous is going to get what they want in life. If you're going to fight for something, you have to be able to meet the enemy on their terms of power. So that's sort of how I like to explain to them. There's nothing unhealthy about Gandhi or MLK as far as I know.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I definitely feel very aligned with that. I've often said to people when people have asked me, like, Jay, how have you created what you've created, or how are you building your work and businesses? And I've always said that, to me, sincerity and strategy have to go together.
Sure.
That data and intuition have to go together. Like, you can't have one or the other. And so to only be sincere and loving and compassionate and kind, well, actually a lot may not happen. And to only be strategic and influential and powerful, you may end up...
Lose your soul.
Lose your soul, exactly. Well, beautifully said. Like, you lose your soul. But when you have two together, and it is a fine balance, and you're always juggling both, and you don't get the perfect amount. You're always in percentages and proportions. But the idea that you can't ignore this side. There's a beautiful quote you reminded me of from Martin Luther King, where he said, those who love peace need to learn to organize themselves as well as those who love war.
Right.
And I think that's
beautiful.
Yeah,
right?
And I think that's what we're saying, and that's what I saw when I first started to share the messages I'd learned from living as a monk and the Vedas and that tradition. For me, it was, if I'm not strategic about this, or if I'm not focused or organized about this,
right.
then I might as well give up now.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to spread itself.
No.